Hi everyone, it's Julie. Today I'm going to talk about a difficult subject. I've covered other difficult subjects like rejection and taking criticism, but today I'm going to say something that a lot of people won't say to you. And this is going to be based on my experience mentoring other writers and reading stuff that I feel like is not ready to be published, and the people who have written it are pursuing publication and they're really not ready. And the number one piece of advice that they always seem to get is don't give up, keep trying. And while that is very solid advice, I want to say that it's not always persistence that you need to keep in mind when you're at this stage. Most of the time, when you think you're ready and you're getting a bunch of rejections, it's not just a matter of continuing to try. It is also a matter of figuring out what you're doing wrong and at what stage of the game you may need to apply some different strategies. So this is very difficult to say to someone, especially when I've been mentoring people in contests and in writing mentorship situations. You want to be encouraging. I've always wanted to be encouraging. I don't want to tell someone you're just not ready, but sometimes that is true. Sometimes that is what the problem is, and that is why they're always getting no. So basically, you're going to hear a lot of people say, oh, this best-selling author has this story of being rejected 20 billion times before they got to yes, as if it's just continuing to ask and continuing to send it out that eventually resulted in success. But that's really just not the case, because just because you've written something and people keep saying no does not mean that the answer is just to keep sending it out harder until you get yes. There's also probably some growth to be done on your part. And if this is the stage that you're at and you just keep sending your stuff out and you're not getting picked in contests, or you're not getting any query responses that are positive from agents, I'm going to give you 5 tips for suggestions that you may want to take to heart if it just seems like you're never getting past no. The first hint I'm going to give you is try researching from square one. You may think that you know the right thing to do, but if what you're doing isn't working, then you may not be right about that. So the way that you would do this, to further break it down, is look at what stage of the game are you getting the no. Are you getting no positive responses to your query letters from agents? No one is requesting your materials? That is probably a query issue. So you're going to want to look at your query letter and say, at what point is my query letter always striking out? Just if you're getting positive responses to your query letter but they're saying no after they read your manuscript, then it's a deeper issue with the material. But if you can't even get someone to respond to your query with a partial request or a full request, then it's probably your query letter. So you need to go back to square one and look at where are you getting rejected, and then start to figure out, really start to research, like take a whole new perspective, as if maybe you don't know anything, maybe you don't know what you thought you knew. This is a very uncomfortable thing to realize, but you want to pinpoint where it is that you're getting the no, and then look at how you address that. Look at advice blogs from writers, look at maybe if you're never getting past the first couple of chapters with agents, they're always rejecting you after reading a couple of chapters of yours. Maybe your writing is good, but your story structure is not appealing to them, so maybe you need to look into better strategies for writing the beginning of a novel. Maybe your query letter, if you're not getting good responses to your query letter, maybe it's too long and rambly, maybe it's not pitching the book clearly enough, maybe you have some kind of problem with your materials, either the material itself or the pitching materials that you need to address that nobody's telling you, that's why you're getting no, not just because you haven't asked the right person yet. So tip number 2 kind of bounces off of tip number 1. Have your materials reviewed. You can approach beta readers, you can approach mentors, you can approach published authors that you may know. It might be kind of difficult to get somebody to be willing to stand in this sort of mentoring capacity, but chances are, especially if you approach a forum like on Absolute Write or some other kind of writing-related forum, you should be able to find someone who's willing to review your materials and tell you maybe where you're going wrong. It could be something very simple, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's going to be a lot of work. So you have to be prepared for their advice to maybe be a little overwhelming. Like I said, a lot of writers try to kind of jump the gun before they're ready, and they start approaching agents, and nothing is going to teach you how to do this except for doing it a few times and then getting feedback. So seek out feedback and then really listen to it. It's so hard sometimes when they're basically saying you're not ready and it's only practice that's going to make you ready. But sometimes that's true, and if more than one person says it, that's the problem, not being persistent enough. So especially if it's like a query letter issue, try to get your query letter reviewed by someone who does that. Look for it online and do some research as to, maybe modeling your query letter exactly off of an example to see if you can do it and then modify it to your liking. If your materials are very, very different from what you've been taught is acceptable, but you've just been thinking, oh, my story is so great that I'm the exception, that's probably not true. I promised you that I was going to say a lot of uncomfortable things in this video, and that's one of them. A lot of times you are not the exception, and you need to kind of take into account that if you're expecting to be the exception to the rule, people are going to find you arrogant. People are going to say, I don't want to work with this person because they think the rules don't apply to them. So you need to learn what the rules are and then make your materials reflect that. And, if you're breaking the rules and you're getting good responses from it, more power to you. But if it turns out that you've been thinking you're an exception all this time, and you're just getting a bunch of no, not interested, or being ignored by everybody whose attention that you want, then you might want to consider that whatever you're doing outside the box is ultimately too off-putting or just isn't outstanding enough to justify the rule breaking that you're doing, that anyone wants to give you a chance. So in my third tip, I'm going to bounce off of this one to that effect. Tip number 3 is just write something else. Nothing can teach you better than practice. And sometimes you start to iron out your own kinks when you try it again. You try it from a different angle. You try a different type of material that's maybe a little easier to pitch, maybe a little less alarming to the big wigs if that's what you're worried about, that you're getting turned down because it's so radical or it's so out of the box. Maybe you should try writing something a little more traditional. I'm not necessarily advocating writing more traditional things to break in, but if you're really convinced that it's just that your work is very strange or very unusual, or it's just shocking or not marketable enough, and that's really the only problem, that it isn't a problem of it not being good or not being polished enough or not being presented in an accessible enough format, you might try something that is maybe a little more in the box, and see if you can get the attention of the publishing industry professionals that you're seeking. This is not a promise that this is going to work, because obviously I'm giving this advice to a pretty broad audience, so I don't know what your problem is if you're getting no all the time, but the problem is something. And you know, very recently I had to change my day job where you send out a lot of resumes where you're hoping to get people's attention, and you're maybe pitching a whole bunch of different fields. That was true in my case where, you know, I'm modifying my resume for each different job. And I got a lot of callbacks. I got a lot of offers for interviews. I must have had 7 or 8 interviews, so I knew that my resume was okay. And in the cases that the people just didn't respond to my resume, I figured it was probably just they found somebody else before they got to mine, or that maybe they found something about my background that they didn't think was a good fit. But it wasn't that my resume was off-putting. Like, I was doing the right thing for someone in my position, that my resume must have been a good reflection of my skills. And if somebody wants someone with my skills, then they called me, because I had the proof in the responses where people wanted to go to the next step with me. And that's where you want to be with queries too. If you're pitching agents or you're pitching small publishers or something like that, and you're just getting a bunch of form letters, then it's very likely that there's something wrong with your pitching materials. But, you know, if you're getting people interested and they're kind of rejecting you a little farther down the road, then the problem is in a different area. So sometimes they'll tell you what that is, and sometimes they'll tell you, yeah, actually your book is just, I can't figure out how I'd sell it, or I can't figure out how I'd categorize it. If it's a problem like that, and you still really want to break into the industry and maybe try to do it with something a little bit less difficult to categorize, then you may earn yourself the right to do something a little weirder next time. But sometimes that's not necessary, but sometimes if that's your roadblock and you want to get around it, then you got to write something else. And tip number 4 continues to piggyback off of the last one. Tip number 4, start smaller. And by this I mean a couple of things. If you're trying to pitch a novel but you've never had anything published, never tried to publish a poem or a short story or an article, you've never written a blog entry, you know, just try writing for a smaller audience. Try writing something that's a little bit easier to publish. Try pitching to a smaller audience. And maybe if this is not something that is out of the question for you, you may try, instead of going a very traditional route, if you're trying to get the attention of mainstream literary agents and mainstream publishers, you may try pitching smaller publishers or even self-publishing if you really believe in your work and you think it's not the material's fault, it's just that you know, the mainstream doesn't like it because it's not mainstream or something. You may try something that's a little more niche, or you may try publishing it yourself and just see how it fares in these more specific and maybe, sounds a little bit maybe rude to say this, but less picky publishers that may be willing to take on something that's a little braver or a little stranger or just a little less marketable, as they say. And what's marketable changes too. So you know, if you really have looked into what makes a good manuscript, what makes a good query, and you're just not finding yourself in the right place at the right time, try starting smaller, either with the market that you're pitching to or the type of thing that you're pitching, just to maybe get some experience under your belt with publishing, and see where you can go from there. And my last tip is take a class or join a program. Sometimes when you're floundering around in the sea of advice, including from people like me, you may find it difficult to reconcile some advice with other advice that you've got. Sometimes it's going to be directly contradictory, but most of the time it's just going to be a little bit nebulous as to what's the next step, what should I do from here. And sometimes you just need a more structured atmosphere to figure out how to do what you want to do. And sometimes if you want to take some kind of class or you want to join some kind of specific program, that often requires money, or at least sometimes an entry fee that might be on the small side. But if you're very, very serious about your work, but you're having a really hard time getting the first steps in, there's a lot that can be learned in a more structured program, and that may or may not be your kind of thing. There are people who can learn and flourish in those atmospheres, and then there are people who are stifled by them. And, you know, even if you think that you might be the type of person who would be too stifled by that sort of thing, if nothing else is working, you can pay to have the advice and attention of professionals. And, you know, I mean, I personally have never taken a paid writing class or gone on a writing retreat. I guess I never really got to that point because all the advice that I followed, I ended up being able to get signed to a literary agent, and I did get a book deal with one of my books. I haven't sold to a big five publisher with any of my stuff yet. Hopefully that's a yet. But I feel like I got reasonably far with my my writing attempts and my writing career. It's not like I've become some huge blockbuster or some giant amazing person to follow and hang on to all of their advice or anything, but I never really felt like I would be comfortable in that sort of situation where, you know, you join some kind of program and people tell you what to do. But I have known some writers who they feel very insecure without a step-by-step program. And sometimes that sort of thing can give you that. You can go to a writing conference, go to some kind of convention and take the programs, go to the panels. Those can be a little bit less intense than maybe purchasing a big writing class that you're going to have homework and stuff, and some of it might not be stuff that you want to write. But there are all kinds of programs out there that I have heard about and I've heard good things about. So I just wanted to say that I didn't really find it necessary or really comfortable for what I needed to do. But, you know, I'm kind of passing along what some other people have said helped them. And there's no shame in doing something like that. It's not like you're a big poser if you have to take a class that initially teaches you where to step first and gives you kind of the first push that you need. So let me just reiterate that all of this is just stuff that I have put together to try to help people who keep striking out, besides saying just keep trying, because that can really be so discouraging to just hear mostly silence and no and never get yes, and no one will tell you why. So hopefully one or more of these tips will give you some ideas on, you know, what to do if that's the situation that you're in. But just to kind of turn around at the end here, I do want to stress the importance of persistence in the writing industry, because some people give up too soon, and maybe it's really not you. Mostly the point of this video is to say what to do if you're suspecting maybe it's the fault of something that you're doing that you can correct and you can learn to change and get better results. But, you know, I do want to remind you that people say that about persistence because it is true. And don't be too impatient. Don't take a couple of months of silence from an agent to assume that they're never going to speak to you or they're never going to get back to you or they must not be interested. The writing industry is full of a lot of waiting, and you're going to have to get used to that if you ever want to move into sort of the mainstream. So I don't want to be discouraging of, you know, people who just want to keep trying and keep trying, but you know, if you've been doing the same thing for years and nothing has changed from a few years ago. I think when it starts to be measured in years is when you need to think about doing something different. If it's only a couple of months, you can stand to learn more persistence and more patience. But I just don't want to get people thinking that you just have to keep trying and that's all you have to do. Sometimes you really do have to rethink your strategy or realize that you may not have the skills yet. You may be trying to, peddle a skill that you think that you have, but you may come to realize later that you didn't have it yet at that point. And I've certainly been there myself. I tried to sell short stories long before I had ever written anything publishable. So, you get there through practice a lot of the time. But if you want to reach out to publishing industry professionals who may be interested in helping people on their path, then they're out there. And, just start thinking about steps that you can take to make your work better, and then continue to also be persistent. You always want to keep that as part of your strategy when you're trying to get your stuff out there, but it's not the only answer, and I hope that helps some of you. Well, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.